the important point is, it's not whether or not he's true to the original teachings or not, because, and I'm not going to go into that because I'm not an Islamic scholar, but he is seen that way by the Al-Qaeda, the Bin Ladens and these people. He is seen that way, and he is looked upon as an intellectual guru for these people. Now, Quibb was from Egypt, and he came to America. He had studied in Europe. He was studied, European literature and the classics and stuff like that. And this is a common background for a lot of these Muslim terrorist leaders. They're not just your traditional people coming out of impoverished society. Many of these people are well educated in your Western thinking. And the same type of people who would have embraced our idea of freedom and democracy back in the 19th century are now becoming terrorists. Because in the 19th century, these are the kind of people, the young people up and coming, the Western educated types, that were embracing our ideology of freedom. In the 20th century, these are the people who are becoming the terrorist leaders. Why? Ideological vacuum. We're not pushing, and we're not presenting our idea because we don't fully understand it. We don't understand its power to transform society. So we sit back and we allow this ideological vacuum to take place. And this is what happens. So Quibb had studied European Western thought, and he had come to the conclusion that Western civilization was decadent, and that it could not satisfy the human soul, the human desire for truth and freedom and all this other kind of stuff. Well, if he's studying people like Friedrich Nietzsche, who was teaching God is dead, and he's studying this idea of moral relativism, that there is no absolute truth, there's only this truth and your truth, and that the central theme of driving human behavior is the will to power. If he's studying these kind of things, there's no wonder that he came to the conclusion that Western civilization is decadent and going to lead towards human destruction. So he comes to this conclusion, and the other conclusion he came to is the only solution is going back to the original Islam before it became corrupted by Western influences. So Islam, there is no Islamic community nowadays, and there hasn't been for several centuries, and going all the way back to the first couple of caliphates. They quickly became influenced by the Jewish, Christian, Greco-Roman ideology back in the early Islamic periods, what Islam refers to as Golden Age. During the 19th century, they were influenced by these ideas emanating out of America, but picked up by Europe, and presented the notions of individual freedom, representative government, democracy, and things like that, and to the point where eventually Turkey, the seat of the caliphate is like a religious, military, and political leadership all rolled into one. The seat of the caliphate, they gave up the caliphate, and Turkey became a republic in 1924, I think it was. And it was soon after that that the Muslim Brotherhood rose up as that was a huge event in the history of the thought of 20th century radical Islam, the giving up of the caliphate in the acceptance of a parliamentary republican form of democracy. So that was big. And so Quibb, he's studying at these Western universities, and he's also the natural result of this materialistic ideology he sees coming up. The communists are rising up, and he can see that. He's a well-read intellectual, well-studied, and he sees the Western civilization, the natural conclusion or the natural manifestation of Western civilization is the communist ideology. And he does not make a distinction between America and Western civilization. America is part of that. Following World War II, and when he comes to America, he came to America in the late 40s, 49, 50, around that time period. And he wants to study in America because America at the time was strode across the world like a colossus. It was the only nation that came relatively unscathed out of World War II. So it had a monopoly on influence, power, economically, politically, militarily, because every other country that could be considered to be a candidate for world leadership had been decimated. So America was the only one. So this is where the future destiny lies in America, because it is the great power. So as he comes to America, and he saw a lot of anti-communism. He saw a lot of people who were, professing Christians. But his conclusion was that Christianity did not have the power to oppose atheistic communism because it was too focused upon the afterlife. And it did not have a vision of the life here and now, politically, economically, a vision that would take care of all of life. So it was a bunch of people off in a little corner wondering about the afterlife. I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly how he put it, but that was his conclusion. So essentially, America is going to go down that same path, because it does not really have an ideological alternative that is a complete worldview. The only complete worldview is Islam, and a certain version of Islam. So that's Islam means submission, and a Muslim is one who submits. Now, in Quibb's worldview, the submission is to the representative of Islam, who imposes Sharia law. You have a caliphate, and you have this Islamic State that is, that's what some Muslims will say that no, it's submission of the individual directly to God. It's not, but this is a distinction that is going to determine whether or not Islam can support the ideas of democracy, or whether or not Islam is totally contrary to it. Who or what is the submission to? Do you submit to the representatives of Allah, who impose Sharia law and set up an Islamic State, and then there's no freedom? That's totalitarian. Or is it a personal submission of the individual? So this is not something that I consider myself qualified to answer. But the answer to that is going to have to come from the Muslims. But the people who follow Sayyid Qutb and his way of thinking see submission as submission to the representatives of Islam. And so that necessarily leads to a totalitarian state. And so America, by virtue of being the #1 representative of an ideology that is contrary to that, if your submission should be to absolute submission to the will of Allah as represented by an Islamic State imposing Sharia law, Islamic law, then the idea that you can elect officials who pass their own laws is absolutely heretical, and is the most impious, idolatrous way of thinking that you can. It doesn't matter if you profess to believe in God, even if you are Muslim. If you accept the idea of representative democracy, if you accept the idea that you can pass your law, that you can pass your own laws, that you can vote for people to pass laws, then you are engaging in idolatry, and you are worshiping idols as opposed to worshiping the true God. And that's going to lead to spiritual slavery, spiritual bondage, and the wreckage of human civilization and human spirituality. That's what they take this very seriously, and this is what they're teaching. So this is what he saw at stake. And this is why America is the great Satan. Because it is the #1 representative in the world of an ideology that is absolutely counter to everything that they believe in. So America is the great Satan. Now, this notion is not something that has went away. I mentioned, he's dead and gone. He went back to Egypt, and he shot off his mouth too much, and he got in prison. He finally is dead. But his writings live on. And some of the ideas I was talking about is from a piece called Milestones, which he wrote, I think, when he was in prison. There's an English version of it out on the web somewhere. But I was going through that, and there's in 2001, I think it was, there was a gentleman by the name of Amir Tahiri, who is an expatriate from Iran, I think. And he wrote an essay called Al-Qaeda's Agenda for Iraq. And there was a book out in Arabic, and he translated some of it into English.